Barbara Lamb, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist and a regression therapist.
Wow.
So
what does that mean to the people?
A regression therapist means somebody who takes people back to something they want to know about, something that they've experienced in the past. It could be something earlier in this life, or even life in their mother's womb, or the birth experience, or even what seems to be a previous lifetime. The idea, the belief behind all this is that we've all had many, many lifetimes, over thousands of years. We don't know how many, but it's all there in our larger sense of knowing, because as a person goes from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime and all the times in between, we are a continuing, ongoing soul. So somehow that soul retains all the memories of all those incarnations. And when we come into a lifetime, we have chosen to work on certain themes, to learn certain things, to make amends for certain things if that's needed, and to open and grow and develop. So that's very interesting work. And with most of my patients, we do the past life regression therapy work for solving or finding the source of an original beginning of what is now a current problem. Because we don't know where the problem, if it's a persistent problem, we usually don't know where that actually originated. So when we go back in a regression, a hypnotic regression, to the source of that current problem, no matter what that problem is that the person is interested in, somehow this soul knowing and our subconscious minds take us back to the origin, I call it the source, of that problem. And once we get back to the source and we see what caused the pattern that is now a problem, we can clear it up, we can release it so that that problem is no longer a problem for that person. It's a wonderful form of therapy. It's not the only therapy forms I use, but that's a very important one. And then, having been trained for about 5 years for the regression work from the International Association of Regression Research and Therapies, a wonderful organization, in 1991, people began to come to me wanting regressions on very peculiar experiences that they've had. Typically, the person would remember, just a few moments of the beginning of an unusual experience, or perhaps a few moments at the end. And very frequently, they'd had a missing hour or a couple of hours and wondered what on earth might have happened during that time. So it began to appear in doing work with those people that they'd been having encounters with extraterrestrial beings.
Wow, now that's a huge leap.
It's a huge leap.
I mean, most people can sort of handle the reincarnation thing.
Yeah, the past life.
It's a past life thing. That's something, it's tangible.
Yes.
So how does the ETs come in, aliens? Where does that? How does that grasp us?
Well, people, you see, are mystified very often by those unusual experiences that happen to them. And very often, they will come back from an experience with certain markings. Actually, physically there on your body. You can see them, you can photograph them. They might have a little implant put in somewhere, really almost anywhere on the body.
These are things you can see in the skin, or?
Yeah, you can usually see a little bump about the size of a BB or a sunflower seed heart. Those are typical
now, are these things
sizes
which,
and
for
shapes.
instance, they've picked up and maybe they've got a cyst because they've they've got a piece of grit or something, or in their normal sort
Usually-
of cysts or fibrous growth. How does one differentiate between a normal medical problem, like a wart or something
Yeah,
like
because
that?
we can have warts and cysts and, all kinds of skin tags and different things like that. But an implant is one that a person might have no sensation of most of the time, but then on occasions it seems like whatever that little thing is inside gets activated. And it may tingle, it may buzz, it might make very quiet noises. It
What
might
kind of
even
noises
move a little.
are we
Oh,
typically-
sometimes like a little electronic noise, or a high buzzing noise, or a low buzzing noise. Very often sounding like a very quiet version of a buzzsaw, but very quiet, and it's right there with the person, even if it's on their hand or between their toes or in their jaw.
So it doesn't have to be
or
sort
on
of
the back.
acoustically near the...
It doesn't have to be near the ear, although many of them are. Many people have implants up here, sort of up through the nose into the pineal gland, the third
This
eye,
is
as many
important. The
people
pineal,
call it.
the pineal gland
Yeah.
is very important.
Very important. It might be behind the eye. Yeah, it might be
How are
in
they
the arm or
administered?
the elbow or the leg or the ankle. It could be just about anywhere. So a person will sometimes just simply discover a little bump that seems to be under the skin. It's not like a little pimple or a bite. It seems to be under the skin. And if they touch that, it sometimes will sort of wobble around.
So the implants you were mentioning,
Yes, well, sometimes I'll just use my hand to demonstrate. Sometimes they'll feel this little lump, and they might push it, think, what is that? And it may even move. And when implants have been surgically removed by Dr. Roger Lear, is the one who's primarily doing this and originated doing this, sometimes when he'd surgically go in to remove this little lump in there, feeling like it's not a cyst or something usual, sometimes that implant will actually move in the skin, and it's very hard to catch up with it
it's mobile.
and take hold of it and surgically remove it. Now, an interesting thing about these implants is that they seem to have a bit of the person's tissue surrounding this little object. And this corresponds beautifully, I think, with the little scoop-shaped mark, like a little scoop has been taken out of the person's skin. It could be from the thigh or the rounded part of the calf, usually where there's a bit of flesh and substance, not right against a bone. And then, so it seems like that is taken from the person on one occasion and then fused into this little object, the implant, and then inserted on another occasion, inserted back into that person's body. Now, the reason why this is significant is that the person's tissue fused into the object means that this object will not be rejected
Yes, of course.
from that person's
That's
body.
very important.
And we have found that again and again.
Because
Yeah.
naturally, if you had a bit of a wood or metal, the body would surround it with a healing thing to push it eventually out of the body.
Yes, the body likes to reject objects, foreign objects, shall we say, that are inside the body and try to expel them. But these implants do not get expelled for the most part because they have the tissue which the body is not rejecting. Now, the implants are very significant in the whole extraterrestrial encounter phenomenon. And I have talked to hundreds of people, probably a few thousand people individually, about their extraterrestrial encounters and about the implants. I've also regressed at this point 835 separate individuals to various extraterrestrial encounters. And some of those people have had many regressions with me to their encounters, and so it's at least 2,500 regressions to this point in time. to extraterrestrial encounters. So the implant question comes up, and we take a look into that. How and when did they get this implant put in them? Always so far in an extraterrestrial encounter is what they find. And we also realize what happens with the implant in the body. Now, some people feel that the implant is that they are being monitored, maybe even physically followed or tracked by the beings who put the implant into them. Other people find that maybe that's happening, but as well, it's happening that their own thoughts, the person's thoughts, are being, in a sense, heard or monitored through this very complex little device, tiny little device. Sometimes people feel that they are being downloaded with information through that little implant object. Sometimes they feel it's a warning, a little harbinger that maybe within a few hours the extraterrestrial beings will be visiting them and taking them away again, very, very soon. So there are a number of interpretations that people give to having these implants put in their bodies. But for me, even though that's a very fascinating aspect, I am particularly interested in what their experiences are with these beings during these, what people frequently call encounters or abductions.
Now, when we discover the implant, does the behavior change? Do things change now that it's been found?
If a person has an implant, is their behavior changed?
Yes.
Well, sometimes,
or their experiences change?
Yes, sometimes that's true. Maybe sometimes not. But for instance, somebody might be awakened in the middle of the night, or they might be just going about whatever they're doing in the day, and they'll feel a little twinging, a little sensation in the implant, and they get the message inside their own minds. They don't hear it as an outside voice, but they get the message in their mind that they are to cease doing whatever they're doing and go to a particular location. They may not even know where that location is, but they seem to be directed through the implant to go to a particular location. And at that location, which is frequently a rural place without other people around, they will then have the encounter begin. So sometimes the implant, you see, is sort of like a call to, okay, come and you will have an experience with us. And the call, shall we say, this message in the mind seems to be very compelling. So the person will just follow it, even if they had another agenda of what they had thought they would be doing.
Now, these are physical implants that you can see.
Physical implants.
You've mentioned that there's other types of implants.
Some people claim that they have what we could call ethereal, that is non-physical implants. And so it's not an object that could actually be taken out of the body. And there are people who claim to have the ability to release the ethereal, the non-physical implants from a person.
How do you release something you don't know is there? If you can't see it, what's the effect when it changes, when it goes? Is there a major physiological change or experiential change?
Well, sometimes the people just sense, sort of intuitively sense, intuitively know that they have an implant, or sometimes a psychic person will be able to psychically see that. And sometimes those are the same people who say, oh, you've got 2 implants behind your left ear, and you've got one under your collarbone, one between the 2 big toes. And so they would psychically see it.
What do they see?
And then, well, they just see what would look perhaps like a physical implant, a very small object. And then they will claim to release that in a psychic kind of way. I personally don't have experience with that, but I hear that from some people. So I can't really say too much about it. But I certainly have worked with many people who have physical implants and physical scars, and I've seen them. There's a woman I met just a couple of days ago who, on her right ear, right on the extra little flap on the upper ear, had an implant, and I could see that under the skin there was a tiny little bump, and she pushed it and it moved a little bit, about 1/8 of an inch, and then she let go and we watched it and it moved back again. And she said she sometimes does get that kind of a stinging, burning, humming sort of feeling and sensation, and then sure enough, within a few hours she will have an extraterrestrial encounter. So it certainly does seem to go together. Now, when people have surgical removals of the implants, frequently, in the 17 cases that I know of involving that sort of thing, they do realize maybe within a month or so that they have another implant that's been put in, unbeknownst to them, but that other implant is usually in a different part of the body. I don't think they ever put it back exactly.
Is it a different type that, for instance, can't be removed?
Well, usually the person will say, oh, I'm not going to have any more removals because there'll just be another one put back in anyway. So I don't know what that second one is like, if it's just like the first or not. Yeah.
Awesome.
But so these kinds of things, these aspects, including the markings, all kinds of markings left on people's bodies from these encounters, I think they're all very fascinating, and they give us what we could consider reasonable evidence that something is happening for these people that is not happening for most of the other people. But what intrigues me the most is about the two things: the beings themselves and what the beings are doing, and therefore what their agenda seems to be with the human beings they're contacting. So there are many different beings. So there are many different kinds of aliens, and any one person might have various experiences, each one with a different group of aliens. Sometimes a person who experiences this is picked up and removed for hour and a half, 2 hours typically, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. Very often they're transported, shall we say, taken by the same kinds of beings. And frequently those are little gray beings. And sometimes there are other kinds of beings, like the tall insectoid or mantis types of beings.
Now that's
very
something that some of our people in England have had a great deal of experience with, the mantis.
The mantis beings,
yes,
yeah.
Okay.
But no matter who comes and takes them to the major part of the encounter experience, the person might on various occasions meet up with different kinds of extraterrestrial beings. One of the kinds is the tall insectoid or mantis type being, and they are very often 7 feet tall, 8 feet tall, 9 feet tall. They could be maybe even taller, and very, very thin. Frequently they look to be pure white. I don't mean like white like a lot of our skin for Caucasian people, but white, like paper white. And very tall, very, very thin, huge eyes that seem to wrap around the sides of their head, very minor, if any, nose or mouth, no hair, typically, and they have very, very long arms, very long legs. The long arms are so long that they kind of come up, and whereas only my hand and wrist will hang down, there'll be a long extra part of the arm hanging down, and hands at the end of that. So they're very tall, very spindly, almost wispy. Very frequently they seem to wear a long robe, white or maybe another color. And these beings, of course, if you're apprehended by one, suddenly you might be very frightened. Here's this great, tall being, not human, looking at you with these enormous, pure, black, shiny eyes, no facial expression. And we're just not used to that in our everyday life. So people can be very unnerved and even frightened at the beginning until they begin to realize that being with a mantis or insectoid being is really all right. In fact, in person after person whom I've regressed, they find that these beings are very loving, even unconditionally loving. And some of them will guide them to wonderful spiritual experiences. Some of them will sort of teach them things mentally, teach them psychic skills, teach them all kinds of mental skills, and they will test the person very often to see if they can learn new, very different kinds of things, different than we would ever learn here. And if they can remember these things, if they can figure out certain kinds of puzzles that they design. So they're testing, they're teaching, they're very often guiding, and either in a very benign way, nothing threatening in the least little bit, and then after a while the person realizes, oh, they're not even scary anymore, they just look really different than we do. And then the more they know the being, the more they realize, this is a really very caring, loving being. So there are lots of other beings as well. Another type that is really known or heard of quite a bit is the reptilian beings. And those are generally very big. They're bigger than most humans and very muscular, like our football players. And very athletic looking, very sturdy, very strong. And they have a whole variation of colors of skin. And the skin is very different. It's bumpier. It's sort of a cross between a snake and an alligator, if you could imagine. And they have greens and tans and browns and sienna browns and coloring generally. They kind of model different areas, different coloration. And their faces come out in front. They don't have a real nose that we can detect as a nose. And very often they'll have very bright yellow eyes, extremely bright, like a shiny marble. And then in the middle of the eyes, instead of a round iris and a pupil, such as we have, they'll have like a straight slit or like a lightning strike shaped black pupil. So those are very definitely different than we are, but they're upright like a human. They walk like we do.
What's their temperament?
Well, there are lots of different kinds of reptilians. Some of them are very interested in human sexuality, and they really like to combine sexually with human beings. Sometimes they do that here in the person's own bedroom. Sometimes they'll take the person and have an encounter of that type on a table in their facility, which seems to be a spacecraft.
Seems to be.
Yes.
I mean, is it a spacecraft or some kind of dimensional gateway or portal? Or?
Well, spacecrafts are a puzzle to us. Sometimes we actually see them in the sky, and we can identify various shapes that these spacecraft seem to be in. Sometimes, though, in fact, very frequently, when the person is taken for an encounter, they seem to be transported upward in a beam of bright light. And because they're in the light, it's really bright in the daytime or in the nighttime. They feel themselves entering something. It seems to be in the air. It seems like they're lifted, and they go into something, and then suddenly they find themselves inside somewhere, because the somewhere that they're inside seems to have curved hallways and curved outside walls. They think this is probably what we would call a UFO, probably a spacecraft, but they usually don't see it when they're actually being taken to it. They don't see it from the outside. Later on, after they're returned, they might possibly, in some cases, when they're deposited back on the ground or back in their car or in their bedroom or their bed, wherever the experience started, they might see it leaving, flying away, but not always. So when they're on the craft, all kinds of things can happen with many different types of beings. Some of them are very tall white beings, again pure white, but with smaller eyes like our eyes.
Is this what people would call the tall whites?
They may be what we call the tall whites. They may be what we don't know how to call them, but very often these tall, pure white beings are great teachers, mentors. Some people I've worked with for maybe 20 or 30 or 40 regressions over a period of several years, they realize that this kind of being is actually like a lifelong companion in a way, a lifelong mentor, teacher, guide. And the more they have regressions, the more they learn about this being, the more they begin to really appreciate the being. And after a while, they're not afraid at all, like they might have been when they first started learning that these things have been happening to them. So we have those teacher-guide types. We have beings who are more ethereal-looking, almost semi-transparent. They might be male, they might be female, and very often the person experiencing them will say, "Oh, this is a female," and I'll ask in the regression to describe that being. How do you know that this one is female? And the person will usually say, "Well, I don't see female body features, but the energy, the feeling from that being feels female. I just know this one is a female, and that other one over there is definitely a male."
How does the communication?
The communication happens differently than we do. The communication happens what they describe as mind to mind. The being's thoughts will get transferred to the person's mind. We call that telepathy. And even the person who doesn't do this here on Earth can telepathically send thoughts to the other being. So in other words, a person could be on the craft and can be lying down on an examining table. That frequently happens, medical-like table from our point of view, and can ask the beings questions. Or saying, "Why are you doing this? What is this procedure about?" And almost always, when I've seen a person do this in regression, they actually telepathically, through their minds, get a message. And the message always makes sense to us. Like, for instance,
personally to the individual.
Makes sense personally to the individual and personally to us as a species of human beings. And a frequent thing that people ask questions about is, for instance, "Why are you examining me? Why do you seem to be taking a sample of my blood and different fluids and maybe hairs from my head, eyelashes, swabs from my mouth, etc. Why are you doing this?" And they will say things like, "We are studying human beings. We want to know how you are physically composed, how you work physically." And they will test people as well, set up little fake test situations, and
is this
then
a psychological
suddenly
test,
watch the person to see what the person's emotional reactions are. For instance, they might show a scene of a volcano going off, or a city being destroyed by a tidal wave, or nuclear destruction, or whatever, and they're not watching the scene that they're showing the person, they're watching the person. What is emotionally going on? They're fascinated, most of these species, by our human emotions, because they don't experience emotions.
Right.
Or the reptilians, allegedly, they say, experience some emotion, but not nearly the way that we do. Okay. So actually there are many different species of beings who are extremely interested in our emotions. They say that they have bred out their own ability over thousands, maybe millions of years, they've bred out any emotional capacity that they used to have. And now they realize that there are some advantages to having feelings, to having emotions, and they would like to have some of that themselves. So they're studying us to see what the emotions are, how we react to things. So this brings me to the subject of the hybridization program, the reproductive program that they're having with many human beings, males and females. So there are various methods that I know of that I won't take time to go into just now, of how they create hybrid beings with us, with our humans, females, and our human males. They create these hybrid children that are partly extraterrestrial, partly human. And they raise those humans, or hybrids, basically, for the most part, on their own craft, or their planet, perhaps. But some of them have been enough generations of a hybrid breeding with another human, and that offspring breeding with another human, next generation breeding with another human, until that hybrid, finally, that generation, is human enough in physiology, in emotions, and having the ability to have facial expressions, in mentality, to be here amongst us. So I am determining, after really studying this for a few years, we have many, many hybrids living amongst us here on Earth.
How does one spot a hybrid?
Pardon?
How do you spot one?
How do I spot them?
How would you determine that?
Yeah.
And what makes them? What characteristics would one look for?
So a hybrid who's able to live here on the Earth would have certain characteristics. You might not spot it right away, but they might have a different component of blood type. They might have very low blood pressure, very low, according to most human beings. They may have low body temperature as well. They might look a little bit different too.
Having a low body temperature, does that mean that they prefer to live in, they like turning the heat up, for instance, a lot? Or
Yes.
would they turn the heat down?
No, they would tend to feel colder here than most of us do, so they'd want to turn the heat up more than most of us would. They very often have heads that are a little bit larger at the top and the sides and the back, a little rounder than regular human heads would be. Their eyes tend to be a little bit larger. I mean, not freakishly large, but larger than most of us ours. And they're usually very bright eyes. They're bright, sparkly eyes. And as you look at one, even quickly, you think, oh, there'd be something about that person. That person may be very attractive, but there's something a little bit different that you can't quite put your finger on until you really, really look.
Do the eyes sometimes go into that slit shape?
Yes, there are human beings who are hybrids, and they've even admitted it to me, whose eyes sometimes change. I've seen it myself on a person, a very well-known person, in fact, whose eyes went from round irises and round pupils, as I was having a conversation with her, changing into vertical slits for the rest of the conversation. I was absolutely fascinated, just staring into her eyes and saying to myself, I'm really seeing this, aren't I? And I was. So once in a while that will happen. I think with many of the hybrids, they, depending on which extraterrestrial species they're part of, their eyes probably wouldn't do that. They wouldn't change to the vertical.
You're referring to, I've seen eyes which go completely white, the whole eye becomes white. And then I've also seen where the black of the eyelid goes into a black fluidic depth.
Wow.
But also
You've seen that?
The actual eye itself, very bright irises, a bright color.
Yeah, sometimes the eyes of a hybrid could be a very bright, colorful iris as well. So, and very often the facial features of a hybrid are really small. The person would have a nose that we would consider a little bit smaller than usual. The mouth might be a little less wide.
Cute.
Very often they're extremely cute from our point of view as a human, or stunningly attractive. Now, so we're talking about people who could be males,
Yeah.
and some who could be females. Another common characteristic is that with many of them, not all, they don't have a lot of change of expression. I mean, they can smile, they could laugh, but usually they don't. Usually their facial expression stays pretty much the same no matter what's going on or what they're talking about. They can probably communicate telepathically, but they know that they have to speak with voice and mouth and so
how
forth,
would that voice
like we do.
be? Would it be any characteristics, any?
Voice sound.
Yeah.
I haven't noticed any difference in the voice sound.
So it's within a
Yeah.
normal range of human
Seems
voice.
to be within a normal human range of voice.
So things like blood pressure and body temperature things are sort of things which would be a medical thing that you would get.
yes, they could
So
find out
essentially,
medically.
what other
Well, there-
ways would one?
There are other physical characteristics too. For instance, with one hybrid I know and talk to frequently, a very wonderful woman, she has a whole different bone quality. This has been tested medically, and her blood is different. Very often with the hybrids, there'll be some different ingredient in their blood, or some of our typical ingredients that will be missing.
Is that a
So they're
copper
different blood
thing, or-
type. Yeah, and of course the temperature, the bone, and very often they'll have one organ that isn't where that organ would usually be in a human. For instance, a kidney might be in the upper back. The reproductive area, the womb, might be up in the chest cavity.
Wow, that's a
So
heck of a
medical
difference.
doctors, you see, discover these things, or they might have an extra rib. I know somebody who has an extra rib, and all other indications suggest that that person is a hybrid. They might have an extra toe, or they might have
6 toes.
fewer toes or fingers. And very often, just thinking of somebody I know who always had a 6th finger that was removed when she was a little girl. Now I'm thinking about her in a new way as a possible hybrid. Now these hybrid people tend to be very smart, very quick, and have a wonderful memory. They've got good brain power, and they tend to be psychic, very sensitive psychically. And they haven't even been trained in that. They're just very psychic, intuitive. Some of them I know can be outside, for instance, and they'll say, "Oh, I sense a UFO over there," and we'll turn around and there is a UFO.
Right.
They can sense it. They can sense when beings are there. One hybrid I know, who was right here at this conference with us talking to me, thought that I was reaching over and touching her, stroking her thigh that was toward where I was. And then she looked down and she could psychically see a little extraterrestrial being there, whom I didn't see, but she has that psychic sight. And she said, "Oh, that must have been the one who was touching my leg." And I reassured, no, I was not touching her leg. It was not me. And anyway, so they have these heightened senses and psychic abilities. And very often, whether they realize yet that they're a hybrid or have this genetic influence or not, they will have a mission that they feel totally called to doing here on Earth.
And do they have a longer lifespan?
I don't know if they have a longer lifespan. I haven't known them long enough years. They might possibly. But they have a purpose, a real driving mission of something, and it always has to do with upgrading humanity and or improving ecological conditions, basically saving the Earth and all species on the Earth, including humans. So they're very dedicated to that. And they also are people who have extraterrestrial encounters. I've determined so far, in knowing quite a number of these people, that hybrids always are people who have extraterrestrial encounters. But now, the other opposite aspect is that not all people who have extraterrestrial encounters are necessarily hybrids. But I do think that we have many amongst us, and they're excellent people. Once in a while, one will experience shape-shifting. That is sort of
is that
morphing
a physical shifting
into,
of the face, or is it the perceiver, the person who looks at the face, seeing
well,
the shift?
it looks like the face will change. There's a woman I know who's back on the East Coast, and she sent me photos of her when she's changing, and the whole look around the eyes and the skin texture changes to a more reptilian look. Her pupils become elongated vertical slits. I mean, the whole eye area really changes.
That's the
And
main
even
source.
people have reported, I haven't seen this happen, I've seen photos, but her body changes into more of a reptilian form. She thinks she's a
there are
reptilian hybrid.
photographs of this happening?
I have photographs of her, particularly of the face with the eye area changing, and it's particularly striking in the eyes, but even the skin around the eyes. And then that kept happening, and it may last only a few minutes, maybe sometimes a few moments, and then it will seem to shift back to her regular look. That particular person is very pleased and very proud to have reptilian genetics in her, because she said the group of reptilians that she is partly composed of herself is a very talented psychically, sort of mystically, very benevolent group. She thinks that they're wonderful, that she knows, however, that big reptiles, reptilian beings, are generally, from a lot of the population, they're feared. And so she tries to keep it low key. But she was doing a performance once, an amateur dramatic group performing, and it happened. And everybody saw her on the stage, really doing the shifting for just a little while, maybe just a couple of minutes. And of course they were looking at her. She could see the audience staring at her, and then it shifted back. She could feel it happening, so she knew what was going on.
Well, in her closing moments, you occasionally visit a place called England.
I do visit England
And there's a
frequently.
few funny things happened with crops.
Well, yes, for ever since 1990, I've been really engaged with the crop circle phenomenon. So for many, many summers, every summer since 1990, I have made a point of going to England and participating in the crop circle phenomenon, in that I visit as many as I can.
Now,
they're
we don't
wonderful.
have too much time left.
Uh-huh.
Okay, Barbara, are they real or are they fake? What's your opinion
The big
on that?
question
The big
always
question.
is, are these man-made, or are they made by some unusual, anomalous phenomenon? I, in my own personal opinion, and having been in hundreds, I'm sure more than 1,000, crop circles over all these 22 years or so, my conclusions are that most of them are genuine, made by the mysterious, unknown still phenomenon, and some of them are man-made, and this happens every summer. But even the man-made ones, and this is very exciting to me,
This is
in
potentially
many
very
cases,
controversial.
very controversial, yeah. But even at least some of the man-made ones, according to those people whom I've interviewed who claim to make them, that very often they are sort of instructed telepathically to go out into a particular field with their friends who join in the making of a crop circle and make a crop circle. And as they go out and into the field and start laying down the crop with their boards, they do not know what the pattern is going to be. They just receive direction and they do it. And this is, of course, usually in the dark of night. And then when daylight comes and they go and revisit that area, then they see what the pattern is. Now, I think that that's incredible. And some of them I've talked to, and I think they're telling the truth from what I can tell. They say that very unusual, anomalous things sometimes happen to them when they are making a crop circle
Such
in the
as?
middle of the night, such as an orb, a bright orb, a sphere of light will come into the crop circle. And in one case, it came so close to a man who was busy laying down the crop, and he got scared because he didn't know what it was. It seems to be very energized and very strong, although small, that he ran, he dropped his equipment and ran down the tram line all the way out of the crop circle. He just wasn't going to go back because he didn't know what that was, and it had a lot of energy to it. So sometimes they'll experience a new being whom they assume is one of them being in the crop circle which they're making. And then they realize that their whole team was over here, but here was this person over here. And where did that come from? It might be a shadow person, it might be, they don't really know, because when they really call attention to their mates to look at it, it's usually gone. And they think, oh, he's kind of crazy, but they really did see it.
So in our few minutes we've got left, you published 2 books? Because
I'm so very keenly interested in these subjects, so involved in them, I've actually written 2 books about them. The first one was about crop circles, called Crop Circles Revealed. And my part of the book is all about crop circles that I learned from my own experiences and many others. Did a lot of reading research and heard a lot of lectures from other people who study various aspects of the crop circle phenomenon. And the second half of that book is really interesting, channeled information from my co-author Judith Moore. And this is channeled from allegedly an 11th dimensional being who channels about the whole crop circle phenomenon and what it's all about and why and who and the races out there who contribute to making the crop circles, extraterrestrial races, and the purpose of it. So it's a very interesting combination. You've got what we know from Earth research and then from the higher perspective of that.
Other book?
The other book is called Alien Experiences, co-authored by a wonderful experiencer woman, Nadine Lalich. And I did many regressions on her and continue to do so. And this is 25 cases from the couple of thousand that I've done of actual extraterrestrial encounters. So what we've achieved, I think, in the book is to show quite a variety of different beings and different kinds of experiences that people have with extraterrestrials. It also has sort of a question list for people who wonder if they might be having these experiences. And it also has information on help for the people who do have these encounters.
This is something which we're focusing on at the AMMACH Project in England. But very finally, very briefly, what are your any future books or projects that you're thinking of?
I have so many books that I would like to write about both phenomena, particularly the extraterrestrial. But because there's so many aspects to that need to be brought out.
Extra-dimensional and
extra-dimensional, yes.
Government involvement.
Many of the beings seem to be in other dimensions, but they come in briefly to ours, and sometimes they take us to their dimensions. I had a wonderful experience in which I was taken to, it must have been a different dimension, because there was nothing physical about it, nothing physical even about me, but I was very conscious, very aware, and these lovely, lovely beings who were so loving and so kindly and sort of semi-transparent, tall, thin, wavery beings. And it was in the air over my house in Southern California, but way up in the air. And a lovely, beautiful,
This is a
positive
fascinating
experience. And
maybe we'll do that another time,
yeah,
but
had
we're run out of time.
reptilian in my living
Yeah.
room. I've had me
Yes.
in my car taken to a craft, and a wonderful tall white being who gave
That was
loads
when
of
you were driving
information.
down the California.
Driving down the California freeway, yeah. And so it just it's a very multifaceted phenomenon.
Okay.
And people who have these experiences, God bless them, they may not know it at first, they may be frightened, and I can certainly appreciate that. But if they can have a chance to look into it more deeply, they may find that they're being educated and trained and inspired, and they're getting healings themselves, as frequently happens, being trained to heal other people as well. So there's a lot going on, and I think a lot of good.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Barbara Lamb,
You're
at
welcome.
the International UFO Congress.
Can I give my website?
You can give your website, yes indeed.
Okay, quickly, my website is Barbara Lamb, MFT.com. So that's Barbara, Barbara, Lamb, Lamb, good English name, M for marriage, F for family, T for therapist, that's my therapy alliance.com, BarbaraLambMFT.com.
Blessings.
Yeah, thank you, it's a
Cheerio.
pleasure,
Good luck.
thank you.
Wow. Now,
So,
what does that mean to you?
a regression therapist means somebody who takes people back to something they want to know about, something that they've experienced in the past. It could be something earlier in this life, or even life in their mother's womb, or the birth experience, or even what seems to be a previous lifetime. The idea, the belief behind all this is that we've all had many, many lifetimes, over thousands of years. We don't know how many, but it's all there in our larger sense of knowing, because as a person goes from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime and all the times in between, we are a continuing, ongoing soul. So somehow that soul retains just a few moments of the beginning of an unusual experience, or perhaps a few moments at the end. And very frequently they'd had a missing hour or a couple of hours and wondered what on earth might have happened during that time. So it began to appear, in doing work with those people, that they'd been having encounters with extraterrestrial beings.
Wow, now that's a huge leap.
It's a huge leap.
I mean, most people can sort of handle the reincarnation thing.
Yeah, the past life.
It's the past life thing. That's something. It's tangible.
Yes.
So how does the ETs come in, and aliens? Where does that? How does that grasp us?
Well, people, you see, are mystified very often by those unusual experiences that happen to them. And very often, they will come back all the memories of all those incarnations. And when we come into a lifetime, we have chosen to work on certain themes, to learn certain things, to make amends for certain things if that's needed, and to open and grow and develop. So that's very interesting work. And with most of my patients, we do the past life regression therapy work for solving or finding the source of an original beginning of what is now a current problem. Because we don't know where the problem, if it's a persistent problem, we usually don't know where that actually originated. So when we go back in a regression, a hypnotic regression, to the source of that current problem, no matter what that problem is that the person is interested in. Somehow this soul knowing My name is Barbara Lamb, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist and a regression therapist. And our subconscious minds take us back to the origin, I call it the source, of that problem. And once we get back to the source and we see what caused the pattern that is now a problem, we can clear it up, we can release it so that that problem is no longer a problem for that person. It's a wonderful form of therapy. It's not the only therapy forms I use, but that's a very important one. And then, having been trained for about 5 years for the regression work from the International Association of Regression Research and Therapies, a wonderful organization. In 1991, people began to come to me wanting regressions on very peculiar experiences that they've had. Typically, the person would remember